So this is an excerpt from my book Freedom in Spirituality, and it's obviously about spirituality. So as you know, this is Diploma Level-7, it's Year 2. So for those that are working to become psychotherapists, we're working at a postgraduate level. And as I say, this is a little bit of an overview of the spiritual side of things. It's only a short passage from my book, which will go into a little bit more detail of the Convergence psycho-spiritual model. But I think this is an important part because it's kind of looking at an element of attributes of consciousness and the soul's attributes of consciousness and how we kind of see ourselves as humans. So because the majority of all human beings on the planet believe that we have a soul, that we are a soul, which means that the Convergent psycho-spiritual model will work with a very high proportion of all people of any faith or no faith expression. We found that because we've had students on the courses over the years that have had the same kind of mix really. Some have got very strong faith, some have got no faith, and you know it works for everybody. So, as I say, it's an excerpt from the book Freedom in Spirituality. So you're safe to use this model when you're working with clients, as it doesn't cause any offence to the majority of clients, and you're not going to push it on anyone who doesn't want to believe in spiritual matters at all, because it will gradually unfold. When you're working with people, these things will unfold. You don't have to push it on anyone, but understanding it from your perspective is very important, so that you at least are aware of the spiritual connection in everything that you're doing. You'll be really surprised to know just how many find it fascinating and interesting, and how much it helps to validate and empower people of all walks of life. It also helps you to find confidence to ask about the spiritual side of life and how that may help your clients. Because if you don't have any spiritual grounding and you don't have a psycho-spiritual model to work with, you're going to be a little bit reticent to even go into anywhere near spiritual things, and that's the whole point of this. There are also philosophers that try to enlarge upon this model and create a kind of quadripartite view, which is the view outlined below, and this is of someone called Houston Smith, and he's cited in Courtright 1997, page 28, stating at the simplest level, the perennial philosophy recognises 4 levels or dimensions. He says number 1 is the body rather. Number 2, the mind. Number 3, the soul, described as the locus of individuality. Courtright 1997. He describes soul as that aspect of us which transcends birth and death, and in Hinduism reincarnates, and is the vehicle through which the transcendent expresses itself in personal terms in the world. It is our spiritual nature which is particular to us. Page 28. And I would say this is true to self. This is the true self he's talking about here. Number 4, spirit. While soul is that aspect of identity that relates to the divine, spirit is identity with the divine. In Hinduism, this is the Atman, which is spirit, is Brahman, eternal, non-evolving. In Buddhism, this is Buddha nature. The realm of spirit transcends the subject-object duality. Again, 1997, page 28. However, although some of the explanation regarding the soul and the spirit is in some sense agreeable to science-believing creationists, nevertheless, in my view, Smith's theory is flawed. The theory Smith proposes here suggests there is a split between the mind and the soul, which academic scholars have translated as essentially one and the same. Therefore, it's not helpful to try to separate the true self and the mind. Therefore, consciousness as a unique person, by introducing a complication of a transitional space called mind, is, to my mind, untenable. We also know the overwhelming evidence witness from the true scriptures, from the divine word, which categorically describe man as a tripartite being. That's tripartite. Born out in creation history, and by the facts explained and detailed with full scriptural support both in Hebrew and Greek texts, and consequently we see it working here within our evidence-based convergent psycho-spiritual model. So we're looking at the tripartite view. It's the convergence desire to help you to dig out the wells of your truth and spirituality. So we endeavour to offer our comprehensive, holistic training to help students and clients build a workable model of spiritual psychotherapy that really works. We believe that humans are tripartite beings consisting of a soul, body, and spirit. And I have a picture there, which will be in the book as well, which just gives you a kind of rough idea of what we're talking about, the convergent psycho-spiritual model, the tripartite human. So we have the soul, which is the intellectual realm, we have the body, which is the physical realm, and we have the spirit, which is the spiritual realm. The soul walk through the scriptures to affirm or deny the soul's primary unique self and the spirit of man as the channel which is integrated, is a connector to reach the soul self and to communicate with God through the Holy Spirit. I'll also explain more scripturally, it explains it more at the back of the book from a scriptural perspective, and also diagrammatically. So in the book it will actually show more of this as we unfold the convergent psycho-spiritual model, or we call it the CPSM. But as I say, this isn't a complete thesis of the model. This is just an excerpt from the book which is going to help you a little bit in understanding the aspects of spirituality. So number one, the body physically, including the brain, is encased in human fluid with the skull bone for protection. And in computer speak, this would be the hardware and the hardwiring updates. 2. The unique and individual soul of a person, and therefore consciousness of self. This also translates psyche in Greek language. Also translates to the mind. We may easily translate the soul as our higher self, the big S. The soul is therefore consistent with being hosted in the mind, right brain. Surely the personal understanding of who I am that is centered deeply in the mysterious and unconscious part of the mind, connected through nerve cells and neuro pathways, which we can say where the soul resides, possibly in the frontal lobe, I have no idea. This is the personal consciousness and the uniqueness of the person, their soul. It is not ego, it is the mysterious and created higher self. The soul is the pure spirit being that is you, seen in computer speak as the software program and updates. Number 3, the human spirit. It's often referred to as the human spirit in ancient scriptures, as the spirit of man. It is more appropriate to consider the spirit to be hosted in the emotional and creative part of the right brain, which allow us to connect with the spiritual realms, access more appropriately through our creative expression to open spiritual channels. So in terms of man, read humankind, we need to note, first of all, soul and spirit are connected and integrated as a whole, though they are separate concepts or elements. They are indeed autonomous, yet destined to find marriage and then may work well together, or they can remain separated, disconnected, where they really need to be reconciled and find find a reconnection to function well. So the soul-spirit separation connection, let's look at that. The eternal soul and spirit of man. I have attempted to separate these two parts of man in an effort to help us understand the main essence of each. I've outlined these below. This is according to Vine's word studies in the Greek New Testament, in the scriptures. First of all, the soul of man. The name soul is translated from the word psyche in the Greek, where we also get the derivative word psyche form. That's where it comes from. The word therapist means attendant, so with the word psychotherapist we denote the translation could be soul attendant. So who is arrogant enough to say we should not attend to spiritual matters as psychotherapists? Psychotherapists are not following the medical model, though some try to hold to science instead of upholding the craft and creativeness within the true meanings of psychotherapies, with our wide variety of persons we simply care for. According to Vine's New Testament word studies, the main translation of the soul is psyche, Greek as I said, and Vine suggests psyche denotes the breath in its various meanings, life. Read the breath of God, as the soul is integrated or given into man. The soul is considered by many to be the natural life of the body. In Matthew's Gospel 2:20 and Luke 12:22, you can find confirmation. The soul to be described is the immaterial, the invisible part of man, the disembodied, or could be translated as unclothed or naked aspect of a person. The soul is seen as the seat of personality, or known as our own self, as in the big S, and not the false self, the small s. It's considered to be the seat of sentient element in man, by which he perceives, reflects, feels, desires. The soul is the seat of will and purpose. The soul is thought to be the seat of appetite, or the vessel or means which searches the world seeking that which was lost and tries to find something of satisfaction. Even the great King Solomon, with all of his known wisdom, said, "Everything is meaningless," by which he considered life to be meaningless outside of knowing God. The scriptures speak of the soul of persons, of individuals, souls of anyone, or even souls of the dead, souls of bodies, the dead soul, and of the souls of animals, the soul of self, the soul of an inanimate creature, the soul of a human or other. The soul is the inward man. The soul also expressed as the seat of new life. And this is where we experience being born again of the Spirit. We may also compare asukos, which is translated as soulness, as inanimate, or the soul is disukos, two-souled, or the soul spoken of as oligsukos, feeble-souled, or expressed as isosukos, like-souled. Soulmate, you could establish like-souled, soulmate, or the soul could be noted as samsukos, joint-souled, with one accord, perhaps as the church body having the mind, psyche of Christ, or even with sexuality as soul ties. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 4:12, this ancient text suggests extreme difficulty distinguishing between the soul and the spirit, as they are alike in their nature and their activities too. I believe this to be very true in my own excavations in word studies. As we also inquire of Wilson's word studies in the Old Testament Hebrew, I believe the suggestion is that the soul is translated from the Hebrew, shown in Wilson's Old Testament word studies, as nobility, elevated and happy state, excellency, or as in Job 30:15, my principal one. And so you can read psyche in Genesis 12:13, Psalm 119, Proverbs 27, Isaiah 4:2. Wilson's word study suggests a psyche denotes the breath of life, the soul and its various meanings, the natural life of the body, a life force, the invisible part of a man, lifeless, inanimate emotions associated with the soul and the spirit. The certainty confused the early disciples because the soul and spirit are so alike in their nature and activities. It's thought that the spirit is higher and the soul lower. I believe this to be true, as the soul is contained in the body and determines the life of the body, in manifesting as alive and conscious, whereas the spirit may be closed, partially disconnected from the soul and soul qualities, and therefore unable to connect with the soul-mind connection. Or the spirit could even be dead, totally disconnected and unable to connect in this state. Or through the heart may come alive and transcend and elevate the nobler side of the soul, where previously the spirit was in the state of the animal self, the id. Well, I discuss this elsewhere in the book, but we'll discuss it later anyway. The soul can be joined with the spirit, we know that, as noted. It's difficult to distinguish between the two. The human tripartite elemental design or connection is suke means soul, soma means body, pneuma means the spirit. The body is believed to be given life and personality, then animated by the integration and influence of soul and spirit. Nice place, cut. So in my archaeological work, digging around in the scriptures over several decades, I have personally found many who've written on this subject of the soul-spirit views. Yet many appear not to have done their homework well and relied on others to interpret their findings, and therefore, in my view, incorrectly gone with the flow. Surely one of the first things we learn as students in the ancient texts and as teachers, we must first learn the need to dig your own wells of understanding. We will then only use the work of others merely to confirm our own work by collaboration with those giants whose shoulders we stand upon, rather than taking the views of anyone, just because their words are sweet to our palate and seem to make sense to our intelligence, even though the spirit within is crying out, no, because studies do not work well that way. We can allow ourselves to be deceived so easily when we listen to many voices. In Vine's commentary, for example, it reads, generally speaking, some say the spirit is the higher and the soul is the lower element. The spirit may be recognized as the life principle bestowed on man by God, the soul as the resulting life constituted in the individual, the body being the material organism animated by soul and spirit. Through my personal inquiry and studies of ancient texts, it's obvious that there is difficulty for students in pinning down the meanings of the terms soul and spirit. I noticed that both Vine's and Wilson's word studies endeavour to cover all meanings, and they're often duplicated. The view we take at Convergence, from the tripartite standpoint and the overwhelming directives and supporting systematic theological stance from ancient texts, leaves me in no doubt at this time to believe that the soul is considered best translated to mean a person or person's life collectively, as having life and being alive, or a life consciousness or personhood or self, big S, that is uniquely you, or mind as in logic, emotions and feelings. We notice too in the soul, mind, where we identify with the animus in the rational mind, the masculine, the father archetyped, and the anima, the feminine, as the life spirit, which is determined by the feminine mother archetype. We're created by mother and father, and therefore we all interject the masculine and feminine. God is both male and female and created us all as such. This is also very useful in working with gender issues in therapy. The spirit is how we access the soul of the divine source and introjected soul qualities, also created by the divine and our corresponding love walk. We access the soul through the soul qualities by way of the heart, the spirit, and bodily manifest them in the world. And so let's look at the spirit of man. The word spirit is translated as pneuma in the Greek, and this word primarily denotes the wind. This is akin to pneu, to breathe. Also, it may be ascribed to breathe or to blow. It can be regarded especially as the spirit, which, like the wind, is invisible, immaterial, and powerful. Therefore, the spirit may be recognized as the wind, the breath, the immaterial or the invisible part of man. It may be expressed as disembodied or unclothed or even naked man. I believe it can also be considered as connected or disconnected, alive, closed, or even dead. It can also be designated as the resurrection body, the sentient element in man, which is considered to be that which he perceives, reflects, feels, desires, purposes, aim, character, moral qualities and activities, such as bad spirit, or as a spirit of bondage, or as of a slave, or in stupor, as a spirit of timidity, a good spirit, or even as a spirit of adoption, a spirit of liberty, or with the spirit such as of a son, or alternatively as a spirit of meekness, a spirit of faith, or quietness. Or it can even be mentioned in relation to the Holy Spirit, or of the inward man, used only for the believer, the spirit of new life, or of reference to unclean spirits, also such spirits of the dark side, such as those spoken of as demons, as opposed to those spirits that are actually angels. It may also refer to the divine gift for service by metonymy, which is those who claim to be depositories of these gifts. And it could be in significance as a visitation from above, as a vision, phantasma, which is rendered spirit, which could be as an apparition, something like the Apostle Paul described when he said that he saw a man of Macedonia in a vision. And then we come to spiritual. The word spiritual is also translated as pneumatikos in the Greek. We know this always connotes the idea of invisibility and power. There is reference to the gifts, the spirituals, or supernatural gifts from the divine. This is shown in healings and miracles, etc. This is a summary of what I believe the translation gives me in relation to this new work here. This comes from the studies of W.E. Vine, M.A. How can we know more of spirituality? We believe, like many intelligent scholars, that it's important to study our ancient scriptures to find enlightenment, because this modern world has moved towards science but has lost a great deal of the spiritual mysteries of the universe, as it embraced both modern thought and philosophy. We have scientifically thrown the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. As modern man has ignorantly moved away from any accountability to the divine or the acknowledgement there is a creator, and begin to answer the question the universe poses, why are we here? And not just to be content with the question, how did this come about? Which is a different question. We'll never understand humanity or life as we know it if we're just looking at the how. There is a need for man to move closer to the mystical and supernatural arena of spirituality, as that will bring more clarity for man, rather than continually looking at the world through a metaphorically ever-darkening glass of science-based knowledge, as man has not sufficiently inquired of the spiritual realities and mysteries of the universe from the creation standpoint. Man needs to recognize that he's still a part of the whole and will be held accountable in the end. The universe cries out to man for his neglect. He has neglected the spiritual at the expense of his own soul. He has not cared enough for himself, neither this world nor his fellow man. The world is in trouble and needs to come out of its apathetic spiritual slumber. And so we look at the human soul and spirit integrations. The ancient scriptures explain that it's almost impossible to separate the two spiritual parts, those of soul and spirit. They are separately identified parts of us, yet very similar. Just as conjoined twins might be understood. One affects the other greatly. As they grow together, these two elements of our being are so intertwined, yet so importantly distinct, that we must try hard to comprehend the way to divide our thoughts on these essentials. As man is inclined to manifest in this world by virtue of the Spirit's interactions and transactions and how the heart receives and processes the treatments. These two spiritual realities are separated for the means of communication and understanding. They require harmonious integrations and are created for specific purposes and essential spiritual connections to relate to the world. The way they manifest in life will also determine those interactions, both spiritual and psychological. The true self, the soul, is seeking to fully live in love as a pure light being and wants to find divine wisdom in this life. And that search will surely affect many relationships with oneself and others. This quest for life will also determine interactions with the world and manifestation in personal growth and interrelatedness generally. We recognize these spiritual elements of soul and spirit are conjoined and will work together as a whole within a person. This also makes sense of Jung's collective unconscious too, the unconscious realm of the soul in the wider context of our innate spirituality and connectedness to others spiritually. We are assured there is a true and deep connection to be found, and we're also told by the ancients that the soul and spirit will also work with the Holy Spirit as one. We may find the divine, God, through this spiritual conduit. These ancient texts inform us that each one of us in the human species is unique. We embrace the premise to understand who we are in this early life existence. And you do not need to commit mental suicide to start from the place of the ancient writings and see where that takes you, and to realize that you are the unique person or soul whom the divine has created, and that means you have a real purpose for being on this planet. That you are essentially a living soul, spirit, as a spiritual light being, and you have been created by a loving higher being we call the Creator. The soul could also be described as an intelligent essence of energy, connected in the more untapped spiritual realms, and also connected through the body to the world. You originate from the divine, and this determines who you really are, within your core essence, as a loving personhood, and you have soul qualities that will try to manifest in this world. We need to find them. When we think about the spiritual dimensions, further that as a unique person, you are a soul who lives in a body. Your soul exists in your mind. The soul or psyche is your mind, and you converge to manifest in this world on a journey as what we have chosen to be known as a part of humanity, a human being. And so the book attempts to answer the question more fully, namely, who am I? You are not what you do, your status or the role you play in life, or the work that you do. And obviously, as students in the second year, finishing the second year, you have firmly, hopefully, got that fully integrated into your understanding that you are not what you do. You are who you are is something different. You're a unique person, a unique soul, a spiritual person, and there is nobody else the same as you. You are totally unique, and you manifest here in this life, starting with a pure and loving soul, and divine soul qualities have been created within you by the divine. The soul is manifestation of divine intelligence. Where intelligence becomes manifested through the mind and the body, it becomes conscious with qualities and attributes. According to Kant, the soul in its original pristine state is pure consciousness without qualities or attributes. That's Kant, 1973, page 113. Kant also describes the soul as a current light that has the capacity to absorb, collect, and be impressed by all that it comes into contact with. I can agree, the soul is a light being that was created by the divine. And obviously we can see references in scripture. Kant equates the soul with the breath of the divine, 1973a. I'm also in agreement with that. Soul equates to life, and breath is the ruach, which is the Hebrew breath referenced in the scriptures as well. Almas, another great, also agrees, 2004, page 27. The soul is sensitive because it is fundamentally an orgasm of consciousness, and consciousness is sensitive. Almas describes it similarly using the term morphing dynamism, that is like a chameleon transforming from one condition to another. 2004, page 77. He further describes the soul's qualities as malleable, impressionable, and receptive. And further to this, I would say, we would also say has unlimited potential, and the soul is attempting to transcend by manifesting as purity and expressions of love. but unfortunately becomes corrupted by an impure world. We know in the scriptures it says the sins of the fathers are visited on the sons and daughters down to the 4th and 5th generation. This goes hand in hand with psychotherapy. We know that when we do genograms and we do family systems and we start to see everything is handed down, this is where the soul may become veiled when we have this damage, or deadened in part, but survives. The soul becomes disconnected from the spirit of man, the heart, but that has in turn become deadened through worldly damage. So the spirit is no longer alive, but dead. It's no longer in touch with the outer spiritual realms, and therefore reverting back to the sense realm in the flesh, Freudid again, descending to a selfish state and embracing competition and worldly pride and prejudice. Almas describes the soul as containing all potential. He says the soul is not only a conscious presence, it's an unfolding dynamic organism of consciousness. She is purely potentiality, a potentiality that is inherently dynamic, whose dynamism unfolds the elements of her infinite potential through a process of morphing manifestation. The unfoldment of the soul produces not only a constant change and transformation, but also movement towards greater actualization of potential. That's 2004, page 108. And so we come to something we call spiritual disconnection. This is what we're looking for. This is what we're really opening lastly, just to give you a taste of what we're talking about in the sense of how this gets disrupted. This has been referred to as contraction of the soul. That is not nearly enough of a description to explain the separation and this understanding of soul-spirit disconnection. It's important for us to understand how we may see the soul and spirit as separate, yet inexorably joined together in every human for the potential to take place. It's been previously said the eyes are the windows of the soul. When there is disconnection, you see it in the eyes. Whilst working on the streets as a street minister for 10 years with the homeless and addictions, it's noticeable that some are on the streets and are at dis-ease with their condition, disenfranchised from the many. But the real disconnection is when the streets get into the person. The person becomes cold and disconnected in the spirit, in the heart. They're no longer in touch with their soul qualities or express a real love to others. Everything calls them to be self and yet not selfless. It's sad that we realise the streets have won at this stage, and we need to bring love to these people to find their true selves once more. The same with clients. Many clients are in this kind of stage where their soul is damaged. There is the connection, their soul qualities have been hidden in a sense. So we need to help them to find their true selves once more, where we reach out and attempt to touch the soul with the hands of the divine, to bring the face of the divine closer for these poor unfortunates, to recognise their deepest inner cravings, which is their unconscious soul's search, to simply find and connect with the source, to be one with the divine again, to find deep and mature true love, as to love is divine. We need to really understand how this relates to everyday life. This is a very theoretical understanding of the tripartite position, and there's a lot of interest there to actually go into and start to find out more, to explore. But the most important thing is that we can relate this to human beings that we come across. We've got to be able to see people as complete people, not just a piece of meat sitting in front of us on a chair with a brain. You know, we have to see people from a spiritual perspective. We have to understand that there are other forces at work, there are other motivations, not just what people have taken in a kind of clinical view of the human being. We've got to go further. We've got to look deeper, find the nature of the soul, find out the potential, when you can start to see someone as a unique soul, you begin to see their potential. This is when you can start to help them, to empower them. When you can understand they're disconnected and they're not manifesting well in the world, that's when you come back to the basics and find out what has wounded them, what's gone wrong, how much do they know themselves, do they love themselves, do they understand that they are a creature created by the divine and therefore unique, do they have self-worth in themselves? No. And so we have to help them to find that self-worth by realizing, believing that they are a unique soul, that they are dearly loved, and that we were created for a purpose. We need to find out who we are, find out what our unique soul represents in us, what our soul qualities are, and how we manifest in the world will depend on how much of a connection we have with those soul qualities through the heart. And so, through love, we can obviously help people to find themselves. And sometimes we have to send them on a quest to find the Holy Grail, to find the uniqueness of their soul, to explore love, to find what mature love is, to really look for that, so that they can get in touch with their soul through the heart and then start to manifest differently in the world. And it affects everything. And it's amazing how important it can be. So although we've got all these techniques in psychotherapy, or all these different tools we can use, sometimes you begin to realise there's something deeper. A person may have a spiritual life crisis going on. Things may be coming from a spiritual perspective. This person could be involved in the darker side of spiritual things. This person could be around other people that are involved in the darker side of things. And so we have to kind of work with them and find out what we're doing. Okay, so that's just literally a passage of the book that I'm writing at the moment. Okay, Freedom and Spirituality. It's just a small part of it, but I gave it to you as a kind of, as a taster, to kind of help you to get a bit more of a handle. We give you the psycho-spiritual model as a kind of basic nuts and bolts, but understanding a little bit behind the reasons why, and obviously the book opens it up a lot more than that. Gives you lots of confirmation and more reading and so on. But the whole point is we need to make sure that you understand the psycho-spiritual model from a very basic spiritual point of view. That's why I've broken it right down. And then from a theological point of view, you need to be able to grapple with some of this stuff that may not fit your paradigm of what you've actually heard so far. Does that make sense? This is my new book, No More Trauma, and I hope you'll really find it interesting. No more trauma. People are actually told many times that they need to just sit with trauma for the rest of their lives. Things are not going to change, they just have to learn coping strategies just to cope with the trauma. And in actual fact, this is a myth, it's actually a lie, and there are new methods today, new techniques and new trauma therapies today which can change that completely. So no longer do we have to suffer in silence in trauma, but in actual fact with my virtual brain reset, this book actually explains how we actually deal with trauma and the fact that there is hope and you no longer need to suffer in silence. So you can get hope, and hopefully you'll read the book and understand where you can get that help and why it's necessary and how it's going to help you to change completely what trauma is, so that you have no more trauma shock at all. Thank you.